Okay. Michael, I have known you for quite a few years, and your story is a pretty damn good one. So let's take it from the top and bring us back to the early days of Pocket.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim. Glad we get to have the opportunity to have the conversations we generally have just recorded. Early days of Pocket. Well, I suppose it'd probably be better to give a little bit of background because it really starts at my kind of crypto or really Bitcoin journey before there was crypto or Web3. I'm from the Dominican Republic and moved to Tampa, Florida when I was 2 years old. But there's a couple things in my life that led me to Bitcoin in 2013. One of those being, having used Western Union, feeling that pain of sending money to family members over that service. And I also worked at a credit union, a couple credit unions here in Tampa, Florida, selling loans, and you kind of see thousands. I saw thousands of credit reports throughout those couple of years, selling loans, car loans, credit cards, these sorts of things, and you kind of see how crappy the financial system can be for some people, and that kind of primed me nicely for discovering Bitcoin in 2013. I really read it off of a Wired article and ended up in the Bitcoin subreddit, read Satoshi's white paper, and immediately drank the Kool-Aid and felt like this was something that could be world-changing. And it's pretty remarkable to see, basically 10 years later, having discovered it and starting to originally just buy Bitcoin. There was really nothing else I could do at the time. I wasn't technical or developer at the time. So I was really just reading a lot and buying Bitcoin on Coinbase at the time. But, from there, I learned to code. I was an iOS developer for a few years, and that was a fun journey. I actually studied international studies in college at USF. So I went from basically a history degree to learning to code. And from there, ended up at a startup in Sarasota, Florida, where I met my co-founders. And this was in 2016, 2015, 2016 timeframe. And for the first time, I met a group of people that covered for my own weaknesses. I had tried to start lots of little things in the past by myself, and none of it got past even the proof of concept phase before I gave up or just lost interest. So for the first time, I had this group of three others, so four total, that we really just bonded and were able to build something really interesting at the startup. And through that process, getting really close and starting to think about what else we could do after kind of our time at that startup had reached its conclusion. So, late 2016, this was after the DAO hack on Ethereum. If you're familiar with that, this was probably the most existential risk that Ethereum had ever been in, even to this day. Things could have gone wildly different at the time, but for us, we were just excited to be experimenting and writing some smart contracts. I was learning Solidity at the time. I started the Tampa Bay blockchain developer meetup. I was trying to, really, as I was learning by teaching, is really kind of the main impetus there. And started kind of going through the idea maze of, okay, we're getting deeper into this Web3 Ethereum thing. What can we build? And I don't know if you've ever read the blog post, I believe, by Chris Dixon, but he has this post called The Idea Maze. And we were effectively going through this process as we were experimenting, doing some random smart contracts. We had an original idea called Telcoin, where we wanted to tokenize your cell phone data and basically incentivize people to spin up these like 5G cell towers. But as we dove deeper into that idea, we felt like it was a little early. We even looked into building, an MVNO, mobile virtual network operator, where Verizon and these folks have to, by law, have to lease you their bandwidth. And through that process, we kind of stumbled across Pocket. And for context, to understand how this works, if you're a regular software developer, and you deploy some code, on a server somewhere, generally that code can be changed, with a quick push and update, right? What was really, truly mind-blowing about being able to deploy my first smart contract is deploying this hello world contract that only I could edit or only I could adjust. And the fact that this just lived on this decentralized computer that, no one really knew how it worked, but we just knew that, I could deploy the smart contract and, I could give it whatever rules I wanted. I could say, only me or only specific people, or, you could send money to it and, you could actually program that money. And this just got incredibly inspired and excited. And I had read throughout the years a bunch of different forum threads. There's a couple really original forums, particularly the Bitcoin Talk forums and the ETH research forums. And if you go down to the ETH research forums and search for incentivizing full nodes, you might see a couple of posts from me from 2017 timeframe. But there was this whole problem that people were highlighting at the time where blockchains were getting more cumbersome to run. You're getting to 100 gigs, half a gig, a terabyte, even in some cases. And this kind of took away from the vision of allowing anyone to kind of operate their full node and, kind of own your data, right? And the context I would put this in is, Web 1 was read, Web 2 was read and write, and I'd say Web 3 is read, write, and own, right? And a big part of this vision was really to enable people to be able to access this data from their nodes, right? But the problem is that the space started growing so fast that these nodes started getting so fat and big that they became impossible to run. And I think really the one of the first people to kind of switch in this paradigm was actually Coinbase back in like 2012 timeframe, where I remember reading an article or a story about the two co-founders of Coinbase and one saying, hey, this has to be maximally decentralized and people need to run their own Bitcoin node to be able to transact on our software and our user experience. Whereas, Brian Armstrong, who's the current CEO of Coinbase, was like, no, we should abstract that from the end user because most people don't know how to run a node. And with a node, for further context, is really what you use to read and write to, let's say, the Bitcoin blockchain. So you see all your transaction history, you see where things went, and it also allows you to actually submit a transaction to the Bitcoin blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain. And really what Coinbase did was be the first or one of the first to really become a big company with this kind of traditional Web 2 paradigm shift where, the company runs all the servers, the user experience, the users don't have to worry about it. They just click a couple buttons and buy and sell Bitcoin or trade Bitcoin or whatever it is. And really up until that time in 2017, that model of infrastructure, the client server architecture, just continued to proliferate. And what's really interesting is that, and if you want to compare it to Web 2, you have a bunch of companies that have to run their own servers, right? Because they have proprietary data. That's their IP. That's their, that's all their information that they own and they have to run. What's really interesting about the Web3 space is that all this data is open source. And if you think about optimizing what you're good at, taking resources, where you want to allocate resources as you're starting a startup or something like that, you don't want to have to run the infrastructure if you don't have to. So as a result, from 2012 to 2017, really every dApp, every blockchain, everyone who was building in Ethereum at the time was basically outsourcing their node infrastructure to just really one company at the time. And this is really important because we're kind of in this space. I am in this space really to kind of avoid, let's call it capture of, a couple entities, which is really, we've got a couple of bottlenecks in the world today, whether it's in the financial rails or social media or even, Amazon Web Services, for example. And the important part about nodes is that they provide the most primitive substrate for people to be able to interact with blockchains. And if you, listening, believe like I do that the space is going to be as big, if not bigger, than the internet, having a protocol, having an open public good that provides most of this infrastructure rather than a private company is a net benefit to the world. And having that optionality rather than being locked into AWS or Google is just really critically important. I think as we are really rebuilding some portions of the internet here. It's really interesting to see folks who are OGs in the early internet days in the late 80s, early 90s get re-inspired to come back and build in the blockchain space because they actually see this kind of original idealistic excitement of what's possible now. And we're able to actually use this technology to build this kind of infrastructure, for lack of a better word, to really be able to provide not only something that is, let's call it capture resistant or censorship resistant, but actually cheaper and faster and more reliable as well. We wouldn't be building Pocket the way it is if we didn't think it could be better, actually, at the end of the day. And I think that's one of the really big benefits of kind of this, when you hear the decentralization meme, really what it is when you're able to use a protocol that decentralizes some other industry or vertical or whatever you might think. It's really because that other existing vector has become ossified and captured, right? Which is why Bitcoin really grew, right? Because people are frustrated with the banks and financial system and an extremely ossified system. As interestingly enough, the timing of our conversation today, we're seeing some of the ramifications of that, and that's where really this space shines is really kind of breaking open and giving optionality for folks where they otherwise wouldn't have. But that's really kind of how we think about Pocket, and that kind of really led us into really thinking about, okay, how do we build a blockchain or a protocol that can do this, right? And that really took a couple of years to really finalize the design before we actually launched the thing.
So you threw out this term Web3 a few times. Just for those listening that might not be an expert in the space, what is Web3 versus Web2 versus Web 1.0?
Yeah, so to take us, I use read, write, and read, write, own as a metaphor, but I'm going to even take it a little bit higher, a little bit more abstract. I really view Web3 as a coordination technology that is really the first internet native coordination technology. There's really only been a handful of these in the history of humanity that have continued to exist. I think the first one was the invention of religion, depending on your timeline, 5,000, 10,000 years ago. Thereafter, we saw the invention of the government. We saw kind of Pharaoh. We went from god kings to actual kings to elected leaders and these sorts of things. And both religion and governments, for their faults, have actually coordinated humans to create a lot of value in the world, right? And more recently, in the 1600s, the corporation was invented, right? And I don't think there's any other invention that has really created more value for humanity than the invention of the corporation. And I view blockchains at the same level of potential of religion, governments, and corporations, right? And these are institutions that have been around for thousands of years, right? They're not going anywhere, right? And what's really interesting, I'm a millennial. I'm sure there's many others who have lost faith in many of our institutions, and there's just there's a vacuum there. And I think we have a huge opportunity as people building in Web3 to build new institutions that are more adaptable to the world that we live in today. And these are going to take so many different forms. In my view, I frankly already view Bitcoin and Ethereum as some form of early institutions. If you draw a triangle between governments, religion, and the corporation, I would put blockchains right in the middle because they take aspects from all three of them. You'll see the fervor that people latch onto for loving their chosen coin. You'll see the governance, the way that these things, the rules that are that are applied at the very beginning of these protocols, because really a protocol is just following a set of rules, right? And you'll see that we've seen the value, the business value, the just the raw economic value of these things go from as high as a couple $1 trillion, right? Created out of thin air in 13 years, which is pretty mind blowing, right? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the timing and stuff like this, right? Like, imagine being on year 13 of the invention of the corporation, right? It's a pretty special time, in my opinion. So when you ask me what is Web3, I really view it as a novel human coordination mechanism where people are incentivized to do things within a defined set of rules, which is a protocol, right? And these things that people do create business, they create opportunity, they create economic value. Some don't. There's lots of scams out there, but that's kind of the nature of a nascent market, right? I mean, not too long ago, people were robbing banks in the Wild West, right? This is really not too dissimilar, but kind of for the 21st century. So Web3, and that kind of goes into this read, write, own, because at the end of the day, you may own a part of a business, you may control, through your vote, part of a government, right? These sorts of things, and the real kind of novel kind of invention here is the ability to get a bunch of people to agree on something who these people have no idea who they are, where they're from, what their background is, what their religious, political affiliation is. No one cares, right? Because we're all kind of incentivized to do something. And that goes it goes above kind of the traditional, let's call it like social, political barriers that we have today. And that for me is really what Web3 is. And it's just incredibly, incredibly exciting.
So what really differentiates Pocket in the space? You started heading there initially, and then we went on the Web3 tour. Where does Pocket fit into this scheme of things?
Yeah, so Pocket is a middleware protocol. So we sit in between the software that is running on your application and the blockchain that application is trying to connect with. So to use a really simple example, you have an Ethereum wallet, for example, and that you open up your wallet on your phone and you see, hey, I have 5 ETH sitting in this wallet, right? Well, for that data to show up on your phone, it might take 100 milliseconds. It might take 500 milliseconds. It might take a couple seconds for that data to load, right? That data has to come from somewhere. And using the kind of analogy I used before, traditionally, that data would come from a server that's owned by a company, right? Let's say instead of my wallet balance, I have 10 likes on Instagram. Well, that data comes from a server that's owned by Meta, right? In this case, that data comes from a full node, which is basically just a database of all the information that's on a blockchain. And all Pocket does is sit in between the application and the blockchain and coordinates, again, coordination meme, coordinates the infrastructure to be able to provide, and coordinates and incentivizes that infrastructure to be able to provide that data to the end user, right? And using a wallet as an example, I open it up, your phone makes a HTTPS request, it hits Pocket Network, it hits one of our node runners, and then our node runners are running an Ethereum node that has a balance of 5 ETH, and then sends it right back up the same way it came. And that's all done within 150 to 200 milliseconds. I kind of view, if you're familiar with the OSI stack and kind of traditional internet terms, that goes from the software all the way down to the hardware and the tight connections that each layer has, or 7 layers of the OSI stack. Pocket is part of kind of this bottom layer of the OSI stack, where we kind of, a lot of people, everyone uses HTTPS every day. So many things happen in the background, from hitting Amazon Web Services, Cloudflare, WordPress. There's so many different things that happen behind the scenes, and Pocket is one of these protocols that really enables that magic to happen at the end of the day, right? You don't have to know who's providing the data. All you care is that that balance showed, right? Or that someone sent you Bitcoin or someone sent you Ethereum. You want to see that balance update that directly comes from services like ours. So when you ask kind of what makes Pocket different, today 99% of the market uses centralized services that do the same thing that we do. They run nodes, they provide an API, and they provide that data to the end user through the app that the developer built. The key difference is that instead of having a company that coordinates all this infrastructure, we have a protocol. And this company also has to charge margin on coordinating this. This costs money. They have an OpEx, they have employees, they have salaries, right? We have a protocol that rips out the need to have any of those employees and actually coordinates the infrastructure without taking rent. So it does this for free, which is one of the powers of having things like smart contracts, right? As an example. Mm-hmm. So we have this thing that coordinates the infrastructure without taking rent by people on the supply side or people running the nodes, incentivized to provide that information. They earn our cryptocurrency. And like I said before, we're not building this so that it's decentralized for decentralized sake. We felt that this could actually be faster, more reliable, and significantly cheaper than kind of our centralized counterparts. And the market that we're in is a commodity market at the end of the day. The margins are pretty low for folks who are running infrastructure on a centralized kind of capacity, right? Because this stuff is finicky, it's hard to run, it's a huge pain, and they're also running it on the cloud, right? Mm-hmm. Today, about 70% of our network of about 22,000 nodes are running on bare metal, which is about 5 times cheaper than the cloud. And even further, I'd say a small single-digit percentage of the network is actually running on owned infrastructure. So there's 3 tiers of kind of infrastructure here. There's the cloud, there's bare metal, and there's owned infrastructure. I expect bare metal to go up to 80, 90%, and then over time have that go down because the owned infrastructure will go up as people get more comfortable and say spend a couple $1,000 on purchasing some servers and running them in a data center or a colo, basically. And that's really our big advantage here is that some centralized entity, it's very, very unlikely that they're going to spend millions of dollars to purchase servers and manage them all around the world and operate them in co-locations. It's much more likely for an individual to spend a couple $1,000s and have the market forces effectively incentivize people to get to those more efficient, cheaper setups. And that's really the power of blockchains and the power of incentives and coordination, which is why, again, I harp on the fact that these are coordination mechanisms that have markets completely intertwined with them.
So what do you think the future of Web3 infrastructure holds for businesses?
Yeah, I think it's going to enable entirely new types of businesses with entirely different types of cost structure. When I can pay 1/10 of the cost for providing the scale or provided the same scale that I am today on the cloud, that just opens up massive opportunities for reinvestment, for focusing on other types of things. Really creative, I think, solutions are possible when you're kind of take a toolbox of different protocols, of other middleware protocols where, you want to build the centralized Twitter, right? Maybe I'll take Arweave or IPFS to store my data. Maybe I'll use Pocket as my RPC. Maybe I want to build an anonymous Twitter and I'll use NIM or some other protocol for privacy, for example. It's what I see as basically a toolbox of different capabilities, very similar to when you go to the Amazon dashboard, you see like 30 different services. But these are all, let's say, Web3 native that will enable, I think, again, human coordination on a scale native to the internet that we haven't seen before, which is very exciting.
We may need to do a glossary of terms and acronyms launched alongside this podcast so that everyone isn't out there Googling all this stuff at the same time.
Yeah. Pause me if you need to explain something or dive into something.
I would have, but we just rolled through 30 or 40 of them. I don't want to have the rest of the podcast me being a glossary. Yeah. but no, seriously, I mean, there's some really interesting things that you've called out. I mean, the OSI model, traditional infrastructure, 7-layer model, comparisons to peeling an onion, right? Of the layers in an architecture stack, things like that. Please, I mean, guys, like these are important concepts that would be great to Google alongside, and we may actually end up putting together a package of glossary terms because there's a lot of good ones that you threw out there. So before I become a syllabus or encyclopedia overnight, let me change the tune a little bit here and talk about your growth and Pocket's growth. And you guys have experienced some incredible shifts, both macro in terms of the environment around Web3 blockchain and also, regulatory alongside of that. And just in general, the growth and slowing of the market in the way that you've had to adapt and shift and become a unicorn valuation at one point, and then lower expectations for investors and all sorts of things like that drive can drive a CEO or a founder mad. Right? Because you're scaling up the team, you're scaling down the team, you're instituting revenue, you're focused on profitability, so many things. So before I, answer the question for you in my rant, because I'm so familiar with what you've been through, first, let's start with what were the expectations of Pocket initially that you had in terms of growth compared to what ended up happening over the last few years?
Yeah. So just to contextualize a little bit, I mentioned we started thinking about this in 2016, early 2017. We raised our first funding in 2018, and about 2.5 years later, we finally launched the protocol itself. And I like to think about it in 3 phases. With this first phase, we did this 0 to 1 invention. Pocket is truly novel, even compared to its peers across the protocol blockchain space. We're using a different economic model. We forked some of the consensus stuff, or some of the core code that operates these things, and we were kind of in uncharted territory from the beginning. And that first year was really spent just fixing things. To be honest, we had several chain halts, which are very, very, very bad. You don't want to have a chain halt. Blockchain is supposed to move continuously. We had instability with stuff like that. Our quality of service was also not good. I referenced, 2 seconds loading. Pocket was taking 2 or more seconds to load early on, which no one's going to sit on their computer or their phone and wait for their balance to load for 2 seconds. So, we were a small team of 15 people. We had grown up to 20 by 2021. But we were just a small team of folks kind of just hacking together solutions on this code that really wasn't ours, because the nature of the blockchain space is everything is open source, and it's very easy to fork and use other models and this sort of thing. So we forked some code. We made a ton of adjustments and changes and modifications, and we're kind of in this uncharted territory, trying to build out this network of nodes while trying to drive traffic and trying to build this blockchain at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. And things kind of came. I think we hit a couple inflection points in summer of 2021, where we were about a year old. We had just launched our flagship product. So we understand here, we're building a blockchain from scratch. We're operating all of this infrastructure. We have a DevOps team. We have a backend API team. We've got a front end team, and then we've got kind of the sales team that is trying to drive growth to this front end product that we built. So we've got, because there's not much out there, you kind of have to build everything basically, mm-hmm. Which is hard and painful and expensive. So we finally kind of got all the pieces together somehow after about a year of being together, or of a year of working on this. And our kind of KPI or the main metric that we use in Pocket is this idea of a relay, which is basically an API request, right? You do an API request and the node serves it back, and that counts as one unit within the protocol, right? And we had a couple really important things. One, like I mentioned, we got stability on the consensus side of the protocol, and we got the quality of service and the speed and the latency down to about 500 milliseconds, which, while not fast, if you're a Web3 developer, 500 milliseconds was fast enough for many things that people were building at the time. And we made two really important decisions that summer. One, we decided to subsidize all of the traffic for folks to help bootstrap the network and prove that this thing called Pocket Network could operate at scale. Because we're trying to get people to use the thing, and we're doing 10 million requests a day, and that app alone is doing 100 million requests a day, and they're just like, how the hell am I going to trust this little protocol to send all my traffic when at the end of the day a developer or anyone operating a business really just wants their infrastructure to work, right? Mm-hmm. There's a saying, or people don't notice infrastructure until it breaks, right? And we were kind of in that position. So we made the decision to subsidize all the traffic. So in Pocket, I'm not going to get into super deep detail of how it works, but basically we paid for the traffic with our POCT cryptocurrency, our tokens, basically at the end of the day. And that allowed us to say, hey, to give us a try, we're free, basically, at the end of the day. And the other really important thing that we did was we decided to add as many blockchains as possible. At the time, it was really only the major ones that were very heavily supported, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, Matic at the time. Then there were a couple others, but there was a ton of other new blockchains coming out that were either very, very sparsely or lightly supported or not supported at all. So with their needs and our kind of crickety thing, we kind of started to gain some adoption through that. And at the time, this was probably July 2021. We were doing about 10 million requests a day or relays a day through the network. And I remember setting a goal. We had our offsite in October of that year, and we were hitting from June or July to October, we were hitting about 30 to 40 million requests a day. We had set a goal, okay, let's hit 100 million requests a day by the end of the year. We ended up hitting 300 million requests by the end of the year. And from June or July, we actually hit, 1 billion requests a day in about 10 months. So by about April of 2022, we actually hit 1 billion requests a day. And let me say that caused, for me as a founder, the year of 2022 was by far the most difficult year I've had operating Pocket. Operating a cryptocurrency or building a cryptocurrency in a protocol with a community, with a very large base of folks who are holding your token and using your token to run nodes. These are very public things. Don't tell my lawyers, but it's very similar to a public company. We're just 100 times less resources, right? Mm-hmm. And through that massive growth, expectations for what we were capable of doing went through the roof. No one knew about us before this. Like really, no one knew about us. And really last year was a whole process of contending with these expectations, dealing with the public markets, the token going up to an all-time high and then going down to basically the prices that we launched at, right? And this, mm-hmm. This causes a whole bunch of noise and a whole bunch of issues. And while we're growing, things are breaking. And, we hired our now COO, and he went and grew the team from, we were 20 people 22 people in our offsite in October to almost 80 people a year later. And that by itself comes with its own challenges, despite, notwithstanding all the other exogenous things that are happening within the markets and everything like that. And is really a process of understanding and really making a ton of mistakes, to be completely honest, in terms of putting people in the wrong positions, hiring the wrong people, learning about that, learning really what we need, understanding what the baseline of expectations of excellence to really kind of meet those expectations that everyone else had of us. And it was really just a roller coaster of a year. Having more capital in the bank than we ever had before, as well. We had really up until we launched, we never had more than 3 or 4 months of runway in the bank at any one point in time, and twice we lost. We went to the edge and almost couldn't pay payroll until a couple of days previous or a week previous, right? And contending with that, telling ourselves, yeah, we'll never spend money, and then we end up spending and wasting a ton of money, right? As an example, and these are just kind of lessons that I feel like they're hard to learn unless you experience it at the end of the day. And you've got so many different constituents, so many stakeholders across the board, and you're trying to make the best decisions you possibly can for everyone, right? And then we go from launching this thing and growing the thing to that was really kind of phase 2, right? To then saying, hey, we grew a lot. Let's now, we've proven out the value prop. People are willing to use us. It's a very different conversation when we're doing $1 billion rather than 20 or 30 million. Okay, let's monetize this, right? We feel like we can charge. We feel like the quality of service, the latency got down to about 200 milliseconds, which is on par with our centralized counterparts. So we have a decentralized network of nodes that we don't control that are incentivized to provide this data, and the quality of service is on par with our centralized counterparts, which in my opinion is one of our biggest achievements, because many people said that this wasn't possible before. I mean, many people didn't fund us because they said it wasn't possible, right? And now it's this shift from building this protocol to building this business on top of a protocol, which is a whole complete different paradigm shift as well, in terms of just how you operate a company, right? So then just going through this evolution last year, and there's a big there's a whole word called progressive decentralization that's thrown around. That's, I think, an investor that I really deeply respect coined, and I'm not a huge fan of the word. I prefer the word pragmatic decentralization. And what I mean by that is, when you say progressive decentralization, you're kind of starting out as a centralized company and kind of figuring it out as you go. The challenge with that is that you have kind of traditional business incentives that clash against the incentives of building this public good, right? Because you want to give things away. It's kind of counterintuitive, but in blockchain land, the more you give away, the more value accrues to the protocol, right? So you have these. If you're progressively decentralized, and if you don't have those right guardrails in place, it's very easy to kind of veer past and go down a different path. But thankfully, we, I think, pragmatically decentralized and kind of built these guardrails from the beginning and said, hey, our nodes need to be decentralized and our governance needs to be decentralized. And that really is what's enabled us to feel comfortable building this business on top of Pocket in the first place. And really just the first example of it. But at the end of the day, it's just a lot happened, and a lot of information, and a lot of people, and a lot of really smart people telling me what they think, people that I really respect, and just sifting through all this from the community, from token holders, from investors, and our own team. It was a lot to take in, but 6 to 9 months later, things are feeling much more stable, and I think we've ended up, getting to the other side of it. But it was truly a roller coaster.
So let's unpack a couple things there. First, the team. How did the team adjust to that hyper growth, and then slow down, and then back to building a sustainable business? Like how did they adjust during some of those twists and turns?
It was hard. If I had to do it again, I wouldn't have grown so fast. We had attrition. We lost some really good people. We lost some of the culture that I think that really was important with what we're building. if we're really, on a mission to build this kind of capture resistant, censorship resistant kind of base layer of infrastructure for all of Web3, you kind of have to have this kind of pirate mentality, right? And we lost a little bit of that, and as a result, I think it was hard. It's a pro tip: hiring really fast doesn't mean you ship faster. It creates more process. And at the end of the day, you have your best people, almost wasting time, helping, or not having the ability to kind of just move and execute and build, right? And that was probably the hardest learning lesson that I had. That led to us going from 20 to almost 80, and we ended up going down to 40, right, over the last 3 to 4 months. And when you ask how the team reacted, it was just go. Things happening, and you kind of get lost in the fog of war in many ways. And looking back into it, if I could have redone things, I definitely wouldn't have hired so fast. But nothing was fatal. We managed to learn from our mistakes, and I think that's just it's not an uncommon experience, let's say, I think, from founders across the board.
Not at all. And another common experience alongside of it is that the faith in the CEO or the leadership team is tested along the way, or challenged along the way. Did that happen at Pocket? Did you experience a shift in terms of team trust and morale?
Absolutely. I think less so internally. There's definitely a little bit internally, but it's more so externally. Early 2022, we were, kingmakers, right? Everyone's like, oh, doing the best, everything. Everyone's making a ton of money. We're doing a ton of relays, right? And then when things go south, it's a different story, And admittedly, definitely I definitely made far from the perfect decisions at the time, but I think a lot of it was fair, but at the same time, you got to be able to adapt and adjust. And if you don't, it's adapt or die, right? And I think at the end of the day, you just need time to prove things out, and people can make their own judgments as time goes on, right? But when you're in the heat of the moment, things are flying at you, and you just kind of got to hold faith that you are making the right decisions at the end of the day, right? Obviously, I'm taking feedback from so many different people and processing it and trying to make the right decisions as well. I'm not making these decisions in a vacuum either. So, that was definitely trying, and we're definitely much more steady now. I think we're proving some things out. I actually get a lot of 2021 vibes from where we're at today, where we kind of had no relays, quality of service was getting better. Just we have a higher baseline today, right? And those expectations are also higher. And I would anticipate that we'll be better prepared to exceed or match those expectations as we continue to figure things out.
What was the toughest decision you had to make along the way?
Oh man, toughest decision. I think probably letting go of my early key leaders. That's probably the hardest thing to do at the time. You work with people for so long, and they get you to where you are, and being able to. It's very hard to go through the mental process of acknowledging, like, okay, this person has been with us for so long. They've been so loyal. They've done so many things. But realizing that, they're not able to help for the next stage that we're trying to get to. I think that those kinds of conversations are by far some of the hardest conversations that I've had over these last couple of years.
Yeah, those conversations are always really tough. Even when it's the right thing, and even when the other person knows it's the right thing, doesn't make it any easier. Yeah. So, we look down the road a few years from now, where does Pocket sit? Where's the company at in a few years?
Yeah, we're at we've launched the new version of Pocket. We've been rebuilding it from the ground up. But I view Pocket as will be a mainstay for kind of Web3 infrastructure. From less than 1% of market share to 10, 15, 20% potentially of kind of this kind of RPC or infrastructure market share. I think I hope that people will look at our model that is truly novel and unique. It has made it challenging at times to convince people that this is the right decision or to raise money. That more people have forked and copied our model. That our governance as well has continued to improve, and also that people look at it as a model example of how to operate a public good at scale, which I think we are in the middle of proving. Having our eye on some of the future exciting stuff that I think can be built on top of Pocket when it comes to some of the novel things that could be built using the architecture of the protocol itself, given that we have a decentralized network of nodes that are permissionless, right? I would anticipate us not being the only folks driving business to the protocol. That's going to be a huge deal. There was something that happened last year with an anonymous mixer called Tornado Cash, and I don't know if you read about this, but basically, the government clamped down on this mixer, and the team that were operating Tornado Cash started using Pocket Network since it's a decentralized version of being able to host and operate these nodes. But the challenge was that due to just constraints and trade-offs that we have to make, we were the only ones that had to serve that traffic, and we had to shut that down. I hope in the future I can point them to, in a couple of years and say, hey, Tornado Cash or anyone else, use our SDK and truly use the infrastructure in a permissionless manner is really one of the most exciting things for me. Exciting
times. Pocket, Web3, just in general. To close us off here, I always ask the same 5 kind of key questions around your growth and your company's growth. And the first one is, what is the top metric or KPI that you are relentlessly focused on?
Yeah, I'd say protocol revenue. So this is the ability for to close the loop of the supply and demand marketplace of Pocket. And that results in, at the end of the day, protocol revenue.
Nice. All right. Second one is a top tip for growth stage founders like yourself.
The feelings you might feel may feel very wide. In reality, what's happening, it's likely, you may perceive them as going very, very up and down, but in reality, it's probably not as good as it is and not as bad as it is. So as things are going haywire, keep that in mind, either on the good or the bad.
All right. Favorite book or podcast that's helped you to grow as a founder?
Favorite book or podcast that's helped me grow as a founder? Acquired.fm. Everything from Acquired. I love the super deep dives in the history of LVMH. Recently they did one. They've done the NFL. They've done Berkshire Hathaway. Just really broad set of the historical, TSMC. Just it's really cool how they dive into the history of these different companies. I would also put the Internet History podcast in there as well. I studied international studies, basically a history degree. I love history, and it's really important that we don't try to reinvent the wheel when there's just so many stories that we can learn from.
Yeah, the changing world order. All right, piece of advice that counters traditional wisdom.
Piece of advice that counters traditional wisdom. Who is it? Is it? Oh man, that's a tough one. Piece of advice that counters traditional wisdom. Is it still traditional wisdom that the financial system is stable at this point?
Unfortunately, it probably still is traditional wisdom. Yeah.
Well, I would say
not that.
I would say buy some hard assets, whether it's property or gold or Bitcoin or something like that. Would be my personal advice.
I'm going to throw out another one that you also said earlier. Hiring more people doesn't necessarily make things go faster.
Yeah.
That's the way. All right, last one. What is going to be the title of your autobiography when you've accomplished all you set out to?
Throwing darts.
All right, a little context.
Yeah, sorry. That's I've lived my life by throwing darts and learning from my misses, I suppose. So my old blog used to be called Throwing Darts back in the day.
Bullseye, baby.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, you've given so much to our listeners today, so I always allow for a little bit of self-promotion at the end. How can those listening in help you out?
Yeah, I'd say if you're curious about Web3, go to our Discord, check out our forums. It's truly a really fascinating community. You'll see governance proposals. You'll see people running infrastructure. If you're remotely technical, try to run a node. Just if you're curious about Web3, honestly, I think Pocket Network, the community is one of the strongest examples in the space of a true Web3 community that is technically focused and not focused on number go up at the end of the day. So I would go to poct.network or forum.poct. That's POKT.network. You can Google Pocket Network. You'll find all the information right there.
All right, awesome, man. Thanks for joining us. This has been wonderful.
Thanks, Jim. It was a pleasure.